This is a special treat because this is a tour of a regimental museum which will soon be no more. Or rather, it's going to be on the march for the next 2 years whilst they build a new one. The Worcestershire Regiments Museum, the Worcester Soldier Gallery, tells the story of the soldiers of Worcestershire from 1694 to the present day. It includes the story of the 29th Foot, the 36th Foot, the Worcester Yeomanry, the Rifle and Artillery Volunteers, and as the years progressed, the regiments they amalgamated into, the Worcestershire Regiment, the Worcestershire and Sherwood Foresters, and finally, combining the Worcesters, Foresters, Staffords, and Cheshires into the massive Mercian Regiment, the heart of England's infantry. Militias, known first as the Third, had been raised since Saxon times, and over the years evolved into militias, yeomanry, and eventually the territorials. The Worcester militia fought mostly on the royalist side in the English Civil War, but this museum is specifically dedicated to the regular and yeomanry regiments that formed after the Restoration and the Glorious Revolution. In 1694, Colonel Thomas Farringdon raised a regiment for the 9 Years' War. It fought under Marlborough at Ramillies, at the Siege of Gibraltar in 1727 to 1729, and in Canada at Louisbourg in the War of the Austrian Succession. In 1751, Farringdon's regiment became the 29th Foot. Now you'll notice this drummer is black, and most of the musicians of the 29th were black. When George Boscawen was named colonel of the 29th, his brother Admiral Boscawen, who had just successfully taken Guadeloupe from the French in 1759, presented him with 10 youths who had been previously enslaved on French plantations. Since the British Army was not allowed to have slaves, he was effectively making them free men. They subsequently volunteered to form an all-black drum corps. Admiral Boscawen thought that the black drummers would be ornamental, likely in the same way that a lot of European military bands attempted to emulate Ottoman Janissary bands with colorful uniforms and exotic elements like the Jevgen or Jingling Johnny. Having a black drummer in pseudo-Turkish dress was thought to be a bit of exotic flair, quite exploitative in principle, though they were also freed from slavery. A bit of that Turkish Orientalism still survives in some military bands today, like in the German Bundeswehr band Schellenbaum. Over the next 84 years, nearly 50 black men were actively recruited to serve as drummers in the 29th. Each man was a volunteer, and many served for 20 or more years, receiving equal pay, pensions, medals, and status as any other soldier. Some sons followed in their father's footsteps, and new recruits joined from Canada, Ireland, the West Indies, and India. The black drummers remained a proud regimental tradition until the last drummer died in 1843, and further recruiting was deemed impractical. Here you can see the drummer in his bearskin, and in a yellow uniform with red facings. In the 18th century, musicians wore the opposite color uniforms from the rest of their regiment to make them more recognizable on the field. As the 29th wore yellow facings on their red regimentals, the musicians wore yellow regimentals with red facings, and the regimental lace was placed in chevrons all along the arms. Another unique tradition the Worcesters had is that they were ever sworded. In 1746, at Port Le Joie, now Prince Edward Island in Canada, the 29th were unarmed, making hay for cattle in a field when they were ambushed by French and Micmac forces, leaving 40 dead. That the regiment might never again be caught disarmed, the officers of the 29th always wore their sidearms, even into the mess. From that day, it had been a tradition that officers wore their swords in the mess, now symbolically just the orderly officer each day. In 1768, the 29th was stationed in Boston, and with growing unrest, they were tasked with keeping the king's peace. In 1772, it was soldiers of the 29th Foot who were involved in the Boston Massacre, or as it was known in Britain, the incident on King Street. The incident left 5 dead. Captain Preston of the 29th, 8 soldiers and 4 civilians were put on trial for murder. They were defended in court by none other than John Adams, future President of the United States. 2 were convicted of manslaughter and had the letter M branded on their thumbs, with the remaining found not guilty. During the Revolution, they were stationed in Canada and participated in the defense of Quebec. A few companies were sent along with Burgoyne and ended up surrendering with the army after the Battle of Saratoga, while the remaining 8 companies spent the war defending the frontier. Not the luckiest regiment in the army. This uniform is actually Worcester militia from about 1800. You can see the short coat and the bicorn. Over here as well, another Napoleonic era uniform. Sadly, there aren't a lot of surviving original 18th century uniforms out there, much to the chagrin of every American Revolution reenactor. And we see the transition to the shako during the Napoleonic Wars. Now, I think my favorite Napoleonic anecdote from the 29th is that they were one of 4 army regiments to ever be awarded a naval crown. During the French Revolutionary Wars, they served as Marines aboard HMS Ramillies and HMS Brunswick during the Battle of the Glorious 1st of June in 1794. You can see that here in the memorials in Worcester Cathedral, and even today on some of the drums and flags of the Mercian Regiment. And here's more from the Yeomanry. A guidon with the cipher of King William IV. In 1832, they provided an escort to then Princess Alexandrina Victoria, and it must have been memorable enough that when she became Queen Victoria, the Worcester Yeomanry were renamed the Queen's Own Regiment of Worcestershire Yeomanry, later the Queen's Own Worcestershire Hussars. Now here's a soldier of the 29th in Napoleonic uniform, attending to his feet in Spain. You can see the distinctive straw-colored facings and the unique button lace. They fought with distinction at Talavera and Albuera. Wellington ended up referring to the 29th as the best regiment in the army in a letter in 1809. You just can't top a compliment like that from the great Duke himself. Over here, more yeomanry uniforms and me in the glare. And we have a Tartan helmet with the fur there for the light cavalry. And 2 1890s uniforms on the right and 2 1830s uniforms on the left. Some of the campaigns. And in these 2 portraits, you can really see the 2 facing colors of the 2 antecedent regiments of the Worcesters, straw for the 29th and green for the 36th, Herefordshire. Here's a map of some of the campaigns and stations they were sent to around the world and the Empire. This is a Napoleonic-era officer's uniform from Lieutenant Colonel Cross of the 36th Foot. Very tightly cut with the gorget there. And some medals, including the Army Gold Cross for the Peninsula, which went to field officers and generals successful during the Napoleonic Wars. And these are mostly military general service medals, which were awarded to veterans of the Napoleonic Wars, but only about 30 years after the war ended. Before 1847, there's only a few medals, the Waterloo Medal, local regimental medals, that go to other ranks, to common soldiers. Preposterous concept, giving medals to soldiers, officers only. Now, this is my favorite case, my favorite era. Here we have a Brown Bess. Remember that Brown Bess was in service for over 100 years in various forms. Men were still marching in with smoothbores well into the Crimea. And here we can see the transition as flintlocks are converted to fire percussion caps in the late 1830s, early 1840s, which made them far more reliable and consistent. The 29th fought in both the First and Second Anglo-Sikh Wars. This is a fragment of the regimental colors with the battle honor Albuera. I imagine their colors got pretty shot up as they were heavily engaged in quite a few battles, including Sobraon and Chilianwala, both battles in which they took heavy casualties. Now, the red coat in the middle, you'd probably assume it was British. This is actually a Sikh jacket taken from the Sikh camp when the British overran it after the Battle of Firozeshah. The Sikh army, the Khalsa, was very keen on modernization, and when they faced the British, they were a peer enemy, completely on par in terms of organization, training, and equipment. In the decades before, Maharaja Ranjit Singh had hired foreign veterans to organize, train, and equip the army. Jean-Francois Allard, one of Napoleon's veterans, Avita Bile, and Alexander Gardner, the Tartan Turban, an American of all things, and their chief of artillery. The Sikh Empire was centered around the Khalsa, and the Sikhs were, and remain, a warrior culture. The Khalsa had fearsome infantry, both heavy and irregular cavalry, massive amounts of artillery, but they also had the Fauj-i-Khas, a division of European-style, European-trained, and European-uniformed troops. And that's where this uniform likely comes from. I believe it's in the style of a cavalry officer's police, likely from their dragoons. Amazing fusion of European and Indian embroidery styles. But the actual story of its original owner is now lost to time. And we have some swords. You can see the blue ribbon and yellow stripes of the Punjab medal for the Second Sikh War. And here we have a bit of flogging, attending to wounds in the hospital. Flogging was very common in the army. We always think of it as a Navy thing. In 1846, a soldier died after receiving 150 lashes, which led to a great deal of public outcry for its abolition. The Duke of Wellington immediately reduced the maximum number of lashes to 50, and it became increasingly rare, but it was only finally abolished in 1881. And here we have an example of barracks life on home service. I think someone might be getting flogged for the state of that bed and the tarnish on that brass. The rifle volunteers are near and dear to my heart. With the adoption of the rifle musket came a change in warfare. Soldiers needed to know how to operate the musket, use the ammunition, judge distance, and direct fire. It's not as intuitive as Brown Bess, but instantly gave an infantryman the ability to accurately put fire on a target in excess of 300 yards and area fire out to 1,000 yards. There were many in military circles that thought this would be the next answer for Britain's defense. Thus, when the French were up to their old tricks in 1859, and there was a great war scare, there was a call for a new volunteer militia force to defend England's shores from the Gallic hordes, the Rifle Volunteers. They trained, they marched, they manned fortifications, and eventually, with the threat of invasion less imminent, they eventually turned into a mixture of militia and social club. A lot of maneuvers, a lot of parades, and of course, marksmanship competitions. And you can see all the prizes from those, the great silver trophies. They wore green uniforms like the Rifles, and we can see the Worcester pear tree on there, ready to defend Albion's shores, and also have a parade and a picnic. As part of the 1881 Children's Reforms, many volunteer units became incorporated into the regular army, and eventually in 1908, the volunteers and the Yeomanry were merged to form a single auxiliary, the Territorial Force, later the Territorial Army. This is talking about the amalgamation of the 29th and the 36th into the Worcestershire Regiment in 1881, also as part of the Children's Reforms. And some medals. And this is a good timeline for the campaigns of the Worcesters. The first National Service Medals for other ranks, the Napoleonic Veterans first with the Naval and Military General Service Medals. This is the Sutlej Medal, the First Sikh War, which took place over the Sutlej River. The Punjab Medal, the Second Sikh War, which mostly took place on the plains of the Punjab in modern-day Pakistan. The Indian Mutiny Medal for the rebellion in 1857. The Queen's South Africa Medal and the King's South Africa Medal, both from the Boer War. and the Long Service and Good Conduct Medal for those who didn't get a flogging, had to have 21 years of exemplary service. Can try on some tunics, the Flaming Scarlet. And speaking of the Flaming Scarlet, this is just like my reenactment tunic. This is an 1860s officer's uniform in Shako. Nice Martini Henry there, like in the Zulu War. And these swords are particularly special. They belong to General Sir James Simpson. One sword is from when he commanded the 29th in India during the First Sikh War, and one is his general's sword from the Crimean War. He went on to take over from Lord Raglan as Commander-in-Chief of the Crimea in 1855. Both of them are Mameluke-style swords, evoking the North African cavalry saber during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign. 2 pith helmets. The dark one here is the Home Service helmet, whilst the khaki is the Foreign Service sun helmet. Have a red Lancer jacket from the Yeomanry. And I love to see these. Queen Victoria herself arranged to have these tins of chocolate sent out to the men, complete with portrait of herself on the front. Now the pear and pear blossom is a symbol of Worcester and a symbol of the Worcester Yeomanry. You can see it all over here. And the regimental silver. And here is one of the most famous items in the museum. The story goes, the Countess of Dudley, whose late husband had been colonel of the regiment, presented each yeoman with a silk pear blossom before they left for the Boer War in 1899. When they returned from South Africa in 1903, she presented them with this pear blossom made by Fabergé. It's made out of gold, diamond, rock crystal, and jade. It was actually on Antiques Roadshow a while back, and it was valued at over £1 million. Now we love a museum horse. There's a Hussar on horseback in his World War I uniform in Palestine in 1917. The Queen's Own Worcestershire Hussars and 1 battalion of the Worcestershire Regiment fought at Gallipoli and then went on to Egypt and Palestine. The Worcester Yeomanry actually charged the Ottomans in Palestine at Hooge, one of the last great British cavalry charges in history, also immortalized by none other than Lady Butler. Over here, more First World War, including some interesting captured Ottoman and German swords. And a helmet. Now we love a Princess Mary tin sent out to the troops. Originally supposed to be a Christmas gift for 1914, millions of these were distributed over the course of the war. Chocolate, cigarettes, the Indian version had spices. You never know what's going to be in a Princess Mary tin. On the right here is sniper body armor worn by Private A.W. Tunkus of the Worcesters. Some snipers did actually get body armor in the First World War, and it seems to have worked well enough for this private. And this is Field Marshal Claude Jacobs' Marshal's baton. He was colonel of the regiment after the First World War. And again, colonel of the regiment is a ceremonial figurehead of the regiment rather than colonel commanding. We've got some uniform tunics, a Wolseley helmet, an SMLE. Over here's quite a bit from the Palestine campaign. You can see the captured Ottoman swords cut down. And this plowshare here, a soldier who became a clergyman after the war, literally turned swords into plowshares. It's made from 1 British and 1 Ottoman sword, both used at Hooge. And a nice Gallipoli star, of course presented to Ottoman soldiers and their allies who fought at Gallipoli. There's the pear blossom again. During the First World War, the Worcesters raised 22 battalions, with some 9,400 laying down their lives. One of the Worcester's finest moments in the First World War was at Gallipoli, and you can see the massive painting of it in the Guildhall in Worcester for the next few years at least. In 1914, with the British Expeditionary Force in retreat across Belgium, they decided to make a stand around Ypres. The Germans began to break through near the village of Gallipoli. The 2nd Battalion Worcesters, as a forlorn hope, ran forward at the double with bayonets fixed, taking the Germans by surprise and holding the line. By the end of the day, 1 in 5 Worcesters was dead. The Worcesters would fight many battles like this, but this one in particular is credited with holding the line for the entire BEF and securing the Channel ports for the Entente. Field Marshal the Lord French would go on to say, "The Worcesters have saved the Empire." And that's the great thing about the Worcesters. They are the humble core of the army, not flashy guardsmen or rifles. They do their bit and often find themselves in the thickest. Along those lines, this small case is designed to showcase the Yeomanry's role on D-Day. After the First World War, the Yeomanry was reassigned from cavalry to an anti-tank role with artillery. On D-Day, the Worcesters served as anti-tank for an airborne division. Parachute and glider-delivered artillery. What an incredible feat of arms and amazing logistics, dropping artillery from the skies. Here's a Worcester on sentry duty at Gallipoli, looking through his trench periscope. Lots of medals here. In the First World War, the Worcesters won 9 Victoria Crosses, each with their own incredible story. The painting in the back is Lieutenant James. He was the sole survivor of an attack and single-handedly held an Ottoman communications trench until reinforcements arrived. This is also very interesting. It's a maquette, a model for a sculpture called The Sentry by Charles Sergeant Jagger, who served in the Worcesters. The full-size one is in Manchester, but more famously, Jagger sculpted the Royal Artillery Memorial in Hyde Park Corner, which has a larger-than-life full-scale artillery piece, and controversially at the time, it showed a dead soldier, covered by his greatcoat, not resplendent like many effigies, but just solemn. Jagger was very good at these solemn memorials. He also did the Sir Ernest Shackleton statue outside the Royal Geographic Society. There's our flying artillerymen coming in again on gliders on D-Day. And you don't think about this usually, but even the shells had to be flown in. So here's a gunner unloading crates of artillery shells from the glider. Some Second World War uniforms. A women's land army uniform, digging for victory. Lots of home front things. Worcestershire itself was actually very important to the war effort. Worcestershire produced radar, radios, planes, Spitfires and Wellingtons, guns, ammunition, even anchor chains. These are lots of fun little things presented here to the regiment over the years. A carved ostrich egg from the 30s. A few things from garrison duty in Shanghai, including this rather spiffing officer's tropical dress helmet. The different battalions of the Worcestershire Regiment fought all over the world in World War II. The regiment was awarded 36 battle honors in total. Everything from North Africa to Kohima, from the Rhineland to Burma. 994 men from the Worcestershire Regiment alone died in the Second World War. Here's quite a few things captured from the enemy. Italian, German, and Japanese. Samurai sword there, and a kukri because they served alongside the Gurkhas. This clock in the middle was apparently taken from the mustachioed corporal himself, supposedly looted from the Reichschancellery in 1945. And here we have one of the Worcesters in a prisoner of war camp in Italy. A number of Worcesters were captured in North Africa in 1942. They were sent to Italy in November, still with their tropical clothing. And he's celebrating because in March they finally got their Red Cross parcels with winter clothing. And here's the home front, preparing for a day in the factory. Bit of canned milk there from America. And then post-war, here's a tribute to national service, because even after the war, military service was compulsory for men over 18 until 1961. After the war, the Worcesters saw service in Malaya, doing UN peacekeeper work, all sorts of things all over the world. We have jungle uniforms, the L1A1, and more mementos alongside the Gurkhas. Now, in 1970, the Worcesters were amalgamated. You know, it's my least favorite process in the British Army. It just further detaches soldiers from their unit's history if they have 20 different regimental histories to memorize, and a hodgepodge of different customs, honors, and traditions. The Worcesters were combined with the Sherwood Foresters up in Nottingham and Derby to become the Worcestershire and Sherwood Forester Regiment, the WFR. Their regimental colonel-in-chief was Princess Anne, and she actually came to open this museum in 2003. And here's a tribute to service in Northern Ireland with the 1990s uniform. The SA-80 down there. They also went to Cyprus and Bosnia. And over here in the desert camouflage during their deployments in Afghanistan. In 2007, the WFR was amalgamated once more into the massive Mercian Regiment, the heart of England's infantry, which has gone on to do many more subsequent Afghanistan and Iraq deployments. And their regimental colonel is now the Prince of Wales. Now, to further confuse things, remember the volunteer movement wasn't just for the rifles. There were also artillery volunteers, and the Worcester Volunteer Artillery was raised in 1864, but still exists today as a Royal Artillery Reserve Battery. They have their own distinguished service history, including the First and Second World Wars. This is a great 1870s uniform with all the tiny buttons. You can imagine it being used alongside one of our rifled muzzleloaders from episodes past. Now the museum is being temporarily packed. It's moving to the Commandery in Worcester, which itself is a 15th century building housing a museum about Worcester during the English Civil War, this being, for the most part, a goodly, loyal royalist town. It's going to be a big move, and a lot of things are going to change, but it's going to be an opportunity to get even better at telling the stories of the exemplary service of the soldiers of Worcestershire. I'd like to see a bit more representation for service in North America and the Peninsula and the Sikh Wars, but I'm a bit biased. The move is assisted by a grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and may take up to 2 years, and there's a lot of work going into it. They've still not met their total fundraising goals, so if you have any connection to Worcester, the British Army, or love history in general, please consider helping the Commandery Project and help preserve and showcase the history of the Worcesters. I'm going to put the link up to the Commandery Project and all the resources available about the Worcestershire Regiment Museum. During the move, the museum will still exist online and on Instagram. The Friends of the Museum will be doing programs, and the museum has staff, trustees, and volunteers for the collection and research and events. An exciting new future for a regimental museum. Thank you for visiting the Worcestershire Regiment Museum with me. I am Darrell, known in genteel circles as the Lord Rivers, and this is the Ministry for History.